investigation at this point is the why. Because in an investigation, you have a who, what, where, when, why, and how, right? So we know what happened. We know where it happened. We know how it happened mainly. They're still working a little bit on the how, and not so necessarily how he carried it out, but how he amassed the tools to carry it out. So there's a little bit more work to be done on the how of it. But the main question, and what we have the least information on right now, is the why. And while motive a lot of times isn't necessary to prosecute somebody for a crime, it's often vital to figure out who did the crime and why they did it and how to prevent it in the future. So in this case, really there's a real hunger for why this happened. Now, of course, in many of these incidents, these mass shooting incidents, it's obviously carried out by a clearly deranged individual with mental health issues. So getting down to the why is going to be, somewhat of a frustrating endeavor in the long run, because we're never going to fully figure out why a deranged person carries out a horrendous act to our own satisfaction, because we're reasonably thinking people. The live-in girlfriend coming back from the Philippines, that probably gave them a lot more information. They've already combed over his electronic footprint. Of course, he's an older gentleman. Probably he's older than me, and I feel like I'm behind the curve on the internet and the social media stuff. So, normally when one of these things is carried out, it's carried out by a younger person, and they have a bigger social media footprint. They're talking to friends, they're talking to neighbors, they're talking to people who he used to play poker with on a regular basis. In this case, the family members seem a little bit distant from some of the public reporting that I've seen. So the family members might not yield as much information as they normally would in some circumstances, simply because the geographic distance between the family and it looks like his relationship with his brother may have been strained a little bit.
Yeah, it seems like his girlfriend, Mary Lou Danley, would be a key figure in all this. But, of course, she was in the Philippines, and at least from what we know, she has told the FBI she didn't know anything about this.
That's correct. And normally, again, this situation breaks a lot of the normal things that we see. Normally, that's the kind of person that would yield the biggest information. Now, they had, somewhat of a different relation. Every relationship is different, obviously, but they had somewhat of an unorthodox relationship. And being a professional gambler, I've known a few. They live a little different lifestyle than most of us. They're somewhat transient. They move around a little bit. They don't put down roots. And he had previous relationships, 2 or 3 marriages, so had she. So I think this was a relationship that was different than most of us would think. And so maybe they didn't share as much information. Maybe they weren't as close. Maybe they spent some time apart from each other more than what we would think as quote-unquote normal couples do.
Now, also, Las Vegas police suggested that at least one of them was saying that he thinks that Paddock couldn't have done this all by himself, that he had to have some assistance. What do you think about that?
I think that's a natural inclination to think that way, but I would not say he could not have. I wouldn't be surprised if he had help. However, I would also not be surprised if he did this all on his own. Now, because, I know physically it's hard to wrap our minds around how he could have done this, but it is possible. And people that are deranged to this extent, that will go to this level of planning and make this, the focus of their life, it's not hard for me to think that he could have done it on his own. It also wouldn't be surprised me if he had help.
What about the fact that Paddock was 64 years old? It seems strange that someone would commit such a violent act at that stage of their life and with no previous record, as far as we know, of violence.
Yeah, this is the big mystery. I mean, there's no domestic violence in his past. There's no other violence in his past. There's no arrest record. There's no, which leads me to believe that there was some kind of simmering rage in him for a long time. Now, whether that, some people are saying it could be a psychopathic gene that he had from his father, and while he didn't have a relationship with his father, certainly that, there's some theories that could be passed down genetically. It's really, that's another mystery in this case, that he had no prior background in any of this. He wasn't, even by his brother's own admission, he wasn't a gun guy, so to speak. He wasn't at the gun range and out, firing his weapons all the time. So, it's really a mystery.